Hello, everybody, and welcome back to That Milan podcast. Martino Puccio, Matt Santangelo here with you guys. Please like, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts. I didn't really get a chance to watch much of that Torino match. I just saw a goal or two, but you don't really have to comment on it. Game doesn't really matter at all. But yeah, like, comment, subscribe. Who you think should be the Milan manager? Who you want to see signed as striker, or whatever other comments you have or suggestions for us. But yeah, Matt, how are you doing?
Pretty good. About to go away for a couple days. I had this season.
That's right. Yeah. Well,
this season has done a lot to me, so I need a little refresher.
Made you cut your hair off. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been around for a while.
By the way, before we get into our segment, we got Paul Fonseca. Is that like a?
I mean, it is what it is at this point. And I'm gonna leave that in. I'm not even gonna edit it out. Paulo Fonseca. I always miss the letter these days. I'm just like I was telling Matt before we started hit record. Just tired from the gym, but we're not gonna go further on that. But good call out. Good call out. But yeah, as you can see by the title of the video and the first graphic that we have on the screen here, we're kind of emerging into this territory here where it's prior to the final game of the season, right? Obviously, certain rumors aren't going to be accurate because Pioli is still in charge for the time being in what is likely his final game as Milan manager against Salernitana this weekend. For me, we'll talk about Pioli when that's official, and we'll just wrap that up there. But as far as things go, it looks like Paulo Fonseca is accelerating towards being Milan manager. All reports from the major guys at this point are indicating as such. The Conceição tracks have cooled significantly. Truthfully, like Ollie Fisher says and many others, and it's to be reiterated here, no one knows for sure. But we'd like to go where, the hot topics are in the news because that's what content is. We're not saying anything is going to be done. But, of course, there will be people out there that think that. Fonseca, not the overwhelmingly popular choice, but I think still a solid one potentially nonetheless. Your thoughts when we initially kind of heard this, we discussed that we thought a Portuguese manager would be the next manager at Milan. Your kind of thoughts with that and the potential of him returning to Serie A, obviously managed Roma prior to this.
I mean, I'm a bit mixed. I think that, look, we've done a handful of these managerial focused videos where I've been pretty open and honest about, like what coach I want and how I rank the targets and ultimately who I think is the best fit for this reason or another. I wanted Conte. It's not going to happen. No matter how many times reports in the past couple of weeks have been like, Conte, they're maybe going to talk to him. I don't think that's happening.
No,
that's not happening. Mota was my second guy. Mota looks like he's going to go to Juventus. All signs point to that. All the major sources are saying that that's going to happen. So those are your two guys gone. And then after those two, we said, you and I, Conceição would be a good third, right? And we had a discussion with Rui a couple weeks ago. Go check out that video. I think there's some things there.
Rui did a great job.
We all felt that was going to be the next coach for Milan because things were very much heating up. And now that track has cooled. And now it's moved back to Fonseca. And this was something that had kind of resurfaced last week with Fonseca, with Fabrizio Romano saying it's, talks are intensifying, despite what's going on with his situation with Lille and Marseille. It looks as though that, that's Milan's guy for X, Y, and Z, right? And my initial feeling and thoughts on this, I think we kind of share the same sentiments, Martino, is, when kind of looking at him as a coach and, how he stacks up amongst some of the other names that we mentioned, there are some things to like about ultimately his tenure or tenures as a coach, right? I mean, what he did with Shakhtar was very good. What he did with Lille this past season has been very strong as well. And there's a reason why he has a lot of interest abroad and obviously in Italy. And I think that people shouldn't really look too much into the Roma stint, although, again, I think people are going to. We all know that their spending, their financial situation and still is not really, feasible for them to
They're
get
still
to where
not
they
out
need
of
to
it. They've
be.
been in it for like 20 years
They've
now.
been in it for a while. They haven't been able to
Yeah.
spend. They've been getting, very strategic loan with options and then sending these players back and working out deals that have benefited them. Paulo Dybala was a free, right? Romelu Lukaku was a pretty cheap option. So you
Yep.
a loan, right? So you can see how they've kind of pieced it together, piecemealed a pretty competitive team that had made a pretty decent run in Europe and is still in that conversation to make a European spot for next year. So I think that people have to look at Fonseca and see a coach that does provide more balance. There's a radar that came out last week comparing Fonseca's Lille to Milan in 23-24 under Stefano Pioli. And there are some similarities there in terms of the numbers and the metrics if you're a numbers guy and data guy. And you look at it and you see that they're a little bit more defensively sound and a little bit more defensively up in the metrics column, which I think that
One of
a lot of
the
Milan fans
higher amount of clean
will
sheets in
like.
Europe.
So I think with everything kind of being said here, I don't dislike the Fonseca hire, but I do feel as though that Milan fans have every right to feel that this is one of those coaches where he's not going to shake the cages. He's a buttoned up, very polished guy. You can kind of see that he's going to play some pretty good football. Not very, very attack heavy, not very defensive like a Mourinho, is pretty balanced. But ultimately, is he going to be that authoritative, dictative presence where, he's going to be outspoken? He's going to hold management and ownership to a high standard to meet his market demands and to meet certain guarantees that he wants. So the jury's still out on that. We don't know, right? We're going into the summer where we expect the budget to look very strong. There's going to be a lot of outgoing players. So all signs point to that regardless of who the coach is, we're going to spend. And I think if you're going to spend and Fonseca's the coach, I think we'll be okay. I do feel pretty good about him as the coach. I do feel he's, is someone that commands respect. He can play a good brand of football. It's translated across multiple leagues, which I think is very encouraging and frankly not easy. Certain coaches thrive in their homeland or their certain area and their certain league. And when they step outside, they wind up coming back because it didn't work out elsewhere. I like the fact that Fonseca, this is my final point. I like the fact that Fonseca has been able to be a bit of a globe-trotting type manager where he can manage in pressurized situations. He can play in good football in Europe and get some pretty decent results, what we've seen with some of the teams that he's managed. So I do like that. And I do feel that him coming back to Italy gives him that hunger as a competitor and as a manager to want to alter the perception that people may have of him from his Roma days.
Yeah, I mean, listen, a lot of people are just, I think, again, I can't speak for people, but the overall sense that I get from an overwhelming majority of this fan base is if you weren't the greatest winner prior to this, then you're not going to be great here. As if that mattered for the current manager or the manager before that, or the manager that won us 2 Champions Leagues in the 2000s, or the 2 managers that won us multiple Champions Leagues or got us to multiple Champions League finals prior to that in Capello and Sacchi. You guys don't learn. For those fans, you guys just don't get it. You just assume that the guy has to be a proven winner prior to. It's never been the case with Milan. So that I always find silly. And again, to put the place of where these teams finished is always lacking significant context. So we'll discuss Roma. Roma at that time, and everyone notoriously knew it, that they had to sell. They had no choice but to get rid of all these key players that helped them get to a Champions League semifinal. By the way, Di Francesco, great manager, right? He's doing so well wherever he is. At Frosinone, they're barely surviving. So that was the manager that got them to the Champions League semifinal. And then we see Fonseca, who played a good brand of football at Roma, but had everything working against him. He was great in Ukraine, Russia, wherever, right? And people don't want to give him credit for that because he's supposed to win that league. Okay, so he does his job. What are you supposed to do? But that's a negative somehow. And then when he goes and wins a cup with Braga, it's still a negative because they didn't place that high in the league. He doesn't win the league with Porto, so he's not that great of a manager. Okay, even though that was 12 years ago now. And for me, with Lille, their performance this year, They do a great job of keeping clean sheets, by the way. A team that is not filled with a ton of talent. They lose Thiago Giallo, who was a reliable defender for them. I know he was injured and all that, but still, that's a club we know personally that we have dealt with that have financial issues. And again, Fonseca finds himself in all these positions and still has his teams playing well. Milan, and I get the overall perception of them from this fan base is largely negative, but this is not 2012. How many times do we have to say this? Is it the greatest of situations that we all love? No, of course not. We want them to be more ambitious with their signings. We want them to splash the cash on a significant striker and upgrade that way. We all want that. Okay. I think everybody is with that. But when you go and get somebody that you guys want butting heads with management, that's not a positive. That's not always a positive because you're not on the same page as an organization. So when you are investing in players and when you have these goals, it ruins the harmony within the club. I love an Antonio Conte, don't get me wrong, but when Conte is being brash, when he is making things difficult for people in charge, that's not good for anybody. That doesn't help anything. So this idea of being a yes man is a negative is silly to me because there's a yes man as in terms of a pushover, and there's a yes man in the sense of we're all on the same page here and we know what we're trying to do. So I understand and I totally agree with fans who want to get upset if they don't see a significant investment in at least one position, right? And I mean significant as in over 35 million. I totally get that. Maybe some deals will be a little bit more savvy than some won't. We'll get into some of those striker options. But I don't see that the negatives of Paulo Fonseca for his personality and how he deals with things as a negative. I don't agree with that. Now, if you want to talk about his success and where he's kind of bounced around and he hasn't managed at the biggest of clubs, even though he's had some pretty big clubs that he has managed in most of the leagues he's been in, right? Like in Portugal, managed a pretty big team in Porto. In Italy, regardless of what some people want to banter Roma with, Roma is a sizable club. It's got a huge fan base. There's a lot of expectation there. Obviously, over with Shakhtar as well. For me, with Fonseca, he is more of the safe route. He isn't somebody that I envision winning a Champions League with. Don't get me wrong there. I do, however, think that you can compete with Paulo Fonseca. I think you will have more balance with Paulo Fonseca. He has done a good job of developing young players, which is what essentially Milan's project is. They've done a good job of extending players. And he's not going to do this thing where we're playing a 5-0-5. And by the way, I don't know if you saw Christian Pulisic's comments about this, where Pulisic was talking about the lack of proper approach in the matches against Roma and Inter this year, where Milan were being a little too offensive and they caught themselves exposed defensively, which is a reflection of Pioli. That hasn't been a reflection of Lille. And again, they're also far less talented than what Milan are. Ultimately, I am a little bit disappointed it's not going to be Conceição at this point because it's all signs are pointing towards that not being the hire. I never thought Conte was serious. I never thought that was a legitimate thing. I think that was more from the Conte side of things instead of the Milan side. And obviously the fan base wants who they want. Sarri wasn't a realistic thing. Gallardo wasn't going to happen. So you kind of find this middle ground of all these boxes that Milan and this management want to check off. Similar style, yes, in which you pointed to in those statistics. Again, familiarity with the league. He also checks that box. He has won trophies before. People want to disregard them just because he was at a certain club. And people used to tell me this was the problem with Luciano Spalletti when he went to Napoli. And I said it would be a great hire. And people were like, oh, he only won trophies there. He only won cup trophies at Roma. He's not good enough for this. Well, you know what? It's all circumstantial. Okay. Certain coaches don't win until they get put into a position that they can win. How many times, Matt, did we hear about Maurizio Sarri and Sarri not being enough to win something? Sarri won Europa League with Chelsea. He's won a Scudetto with Juventus. There's so many different things that managers don't end up winning until they get put into the right situation or with the right team to win. Not saying they're here as favorites for the Scudetto. We don't know what's going to happen with Inter with new ownership. But the fact is this. You mentioned it. 100 million potentially for this summer market to build off of the current team already. to obviously get an upgrade at the managerial position. Is it a significant one? Probably not. But at the same time, it's still an upgrade just because of the way Pioli was doing things the past 2 years. So for me, this is a positive, but this doesn't signal the Milan are back to competing for the Champions League. Guys, we're still years away from that. I hate to break that news to you, but that's the reality of the situation. What are your pros or cons that you like looking at when it comes to Fonseca? I know you touched on a bunch of those things, but for me, I think it's a little bit more harsh from the fan base. He does play a good style. I think he's obviously more well-balanced. Do you think his personality is something that could mesh well with this club?
I mean, it's difficult to say. I think that, look, you could have personalities that jive and mesh well with certain groups, and people can say this is a can't miss, this is a surefire thing. And then it fizzles out and it doesn't work for whatever reason. I mean, people look to Chelsea's project and they go, they got Pochettino. He's in a Premier League established manager. He's coached at big clubs. He's made a Champions League final with Tottenham. And Chelsea can spend money. They got a really good squad here. Now, I know they came on very good towards the tail end of the season, but he's out of a job and they played pretty poorly for large chunks of the season. So sometimes things don't work out, and sometimes managers, players included, punch above their weight. They have expectations set upon them by the public, the media, fans as, well, this guy ain't going to do anything. This guy hasn't won this. He hasn't won here. How can he be able to develop the players we have? And then he gets into a new opportunity and it just works. I mean, you said it yourself, right? Who had in their wildest dreams had Milan coming in with to win a Scudetto under Stefano Pioli when he was hired? As soon as he was hired, if someone said to you, this is the manager that's going to give Milan their first big trophy.
Not to cut you off, his biggest accomplishment was what, brother? It was finishing top 3 with Lazio to get into the Champions League. That was the
so no one expected that. No one expected that, right?
Yeah.
So you could point to so many different things in this game, and that's what I love about it too. There's still that there's still that uncertainty, right? And that's what kind of makes you dream, right? And there's the Leicesters, there's the Bayer Leverkusens, a very inexperienced, a very smart man in Xabi Alonso coaches or takes the Bayer Leverkusen job. 17th place in the league at the end or the tail end of 2022, and they're only 51 games unbeaten, and they're 90 minutes away from a Europa League final. So things happen in the sport. I'm not saying it's the same case, but much like with players, sometimes coaches find a fit and it just works. I mean, there's a lot of things in this equation for him going to Milan that I do like, and I think there's more things to like than dislike. In that there's that familiarity with the French league. Milan are probably still going to be hot in looking at players in that league. They have been for years.
And one of his own players, a couple of his own players.
Santos, Jonathan David, just to name a few. You also have that Portuguese connection with a lot of the players that are in this league that are currently employed by AC Milan, none more prevalent and in the limelight than our star player, Rafael Leao. And a key man in our scouting and directorial area in Moncada, right? So there are a lot of things to like about having Fonseca here. Yeah. I'm not going to be one. I'm very honest. I'll give people my honest opinion about certain things. And if I'm wrong, I'll come back to this video and say, you know what? I got it wrong. Martino, you got it wrong. But I genuinely feel that we have a good nucleus, a good foundation here. We're in a good financial position. We just need a coach that is open to expanding the ideas and vision of this team and playing a different brand of football. And if Paulo Fonseca can come in and administer that, and he can do it with the guys we have, I think the key for him ultimately, again, if he gets this job, is a quick start. We don't need another Gianpaolo situation where we spent, mind you, that summer where we signed Gianpaolo, a fair amount of money. We brought in Teo, Benacer, Leao for almost 30 million. Individually. So we did spend a good amount of money on Gianpaolo. 8 games in, 7 games in, he was gone. So I think the key thing, regardless, is that's going to set the tone and ultimately help ease the fans, because change and uncertainty is what gives people fear. And especially after the season that Milan just had. If we come into this summer and says Fonseca's your coach and we address the needs that we need to address, as we've been highlighting in every single video for the past couple months, and we get off to a pretty good start, similar to what we did this year, where we handled the teams in front of us and we were in a good position, and that's largely to credit for why we actually finished second in the league, amongst other things. No one's going to be saying anything about Fonseca. No one's going to be saying he didn't win the title here, he didn't do this here, he came up short with this club, I don't think he can do this. That's what fans want. Fans want someone that can bring a new look, new spirit to this team.
Yeah.
And I think that Fonseca could be a good hire for us. Truthfully, the results of the field are going to say everything. But as of right now, I don't have any reason to come on here, start shouting, start getting angry, start getting frustrated. We're just about to finish the season. We got one match left. There's change. Players are leaving. Money's coming in. We're going to be able to spend for Fonseca. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because I do think he is a solid manager who has proven time and time again in very different leagues to get some pretty good results. You give a manager that has been able to implement his ideas, get some good results, and you give him money, I like that. That has appealed to me. And if it can't be the managers that we've been talking about in previous videos, Martino, then I'm okay with Fonseca. Is it my dream hire? My dream hire is a Klopp or a Pep Guardiola. That's not happening.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's not happening.
How many times do we have to say that?
And can he do a job? I think he could do a pretty good job with us.
Yeah, guys, 3 of the past 4 seasons, Milan have lost the league by double digits. The one time they won the league, they won it by 1 point on the final match day. This isn't a juggernaut. I love the team that won. But the reality was this. Failings in the cups. How many times? I mean, just the overall defense, right? So, perfect thing. I know we don't want to talk about Torino too much, and this is why there needs to be a change, and a lot needs to be put on the players as well. But when you see Malik Chow or Tomori and these guys on these crosses failing to mark, just truly horrid. I mean, come on, where are we? These are professionals here. The professionals can't mark like that, where guys have acres of space. The ghost of Duvan Zapata is just free to roam and do whatever he wants. Truthfully, there are deeper issues. Fixable, but deeper issues. Some of them can be fixed by the transfer market. Some of them are by a new voice and a manager. And third, they're super young and they need experience. So, shocker, the guy, by the way, I'm going to pat myself on the back for this. I told y'all Malik Chow was going to struggle this year. Just the fact of the matter. Good player, good talent. It takes time. How many times do we have to discuss about, I don't want to go on a tangent about this, but how many times do we discuss, and everybody knows this with defenders, it takes years for them to be successful, to reach their peak level.
Fans of an Italian club should know that better than most, too.
Say that again?
Fans coming from an Italian background or with familiarity with Serie A should know that, too.
Virgil van Dijk, arguably the best center back of the past 5 to 8 years, whatever, right? We all like to laugh at him for how long it took him to get to where he was. But guess what? He got to be the best center back in the world. And he didn't go through this traditional route of just you're at a big club and then you turn into that guy. He was a Celtic. Pretty big club, don't get me wrong. But Southampton. And then he goes to Liverpool and emerges to who he is. Just because Malik Chow at 21, 22 isn't that, or Pierre Kalulu, it's just we have to step back and breathe and remember that the project is super young players. And despite the fact that they overachieved 1 year in one competition, playing once a week after getting eliminated, it's a big difference, okay? So there are strides to be made. Inter still won the league by a bunch. And could we beat them for once? Yeah. And with that, into the transfer market, we hear more and more rumblings. We'll kind of get into some of these striker options. We will do a video about Jonathan David, who's been at Lille, obviously Canadian national team striker, one of the better strikers in CONCACAF. Take that as you will, him and Santi Jimenez. But Guirassy is the name that has popped up. Stuttgart management had arrived at Casa Milan today. They were essentially discussing everything that went down in terms of, going from his release clause, which has been reported at 17.5 million euro, which is cheap. Two things. One, growth decree doesn't exist anymore, so that's a little difficult. Two, Guirassy is asking for 5 million net. This has been reported in an article on sempremilan.com. I'll put that in the description of the video. Matt, Guirassy had a fantastic season this year. 30 goals, 28 in the league. People like to point towards, just his overall production. He scored at least 10 goals every single year for the past 4 years. Got to Stuttgart last year, right? 11 goals in 22 matches in the league. There is that productivity there. He has gotten better every single year. The catch with him is the amount of money that he wants. He is 28 years of age. He doesn't have the longest of track records, and this is a pretty significant jump. I would like the signing. If it wasn't anywhere near those wages, I think half of those wages would be fine. And then the release clause is fantastic. But if he's going to sit there and ask for that amount of money, then I don't want to bother with him. I think that this would be a good signing if you can't get Xerxes, if you can't get Benjamin Sesko, because Sesko, let's face it, right, guys? Like 65 million clause. They're trying to extend him to get even more money from these Premier League teams. We're sorry. I guess our video was too popular on him, and now Premier League teams clearly wanted to go in for him. But he is that special of a talent. For me, Matt, this is kind of what I was talking about months back. That Milan are going to sort of be in this market for a striker. They're going to realize the striker market is, to an extent, for a club like Milan, overinflated because some of these prices for these players are significant. Xerxes for 40 million, if it's just 40 million flat, okay. But Sesko, 65 million at the age of 21.
Yeah.
And then so on and so forth. Guys like Isak going for 60 million, right? When these deals go down. Milan are going to have to, unfortunately, pivot here, I think, is what's ultimately going to happen. If they don't get Xerxes, which by all means from the top reporters looks like the guy. But Guirassy, I want to talk about it. This is an interesting case. Not many players really emerge at that position later on into their career. I've seen him. He's consistent. He's a talent, but are the concerns warranted strictly because of his age?
I mean, I can see where there's a lot of confusion and questioning by Milan fans with this. Rightfully so. I mean, we've had a project that's been built around youth and young players and getting players, before their breakout and getting them on the quote unquote low before they reach their peak, right?
Sure.
So Rafa being one of them. He spent a good amount of money. People were scratching their head and they're like, who is this guy? Like, he's got 8 goals to his name in a top 5 league, and we're spending almost 30 million on him. Like, what are we doing here? Off the top, this move feels like a safe move that could be something that sets up the market. It could be one of those moves where they want to act quickly. They like the fee. The fee outweighs the uncertainty or the question surrounding his age. That they may say, hey, look, if we wait on this, some club is going to go and snap him up for that figure, which in this era of football is an absolute bargain. I mean, we've seen players go for that fee and we're scratching our head like, who went for 20 million? And you got a guy who scored 28 goals in a league. I mean, if it's another league outside of the top 5, I can see why some people have a lot more pause. But 28 goals is 28 goals. And ultimately, Milan have shown in the past couple of years that chance creation is not a problem. It's the guys who can finish. We're not asking Guirassy to be this trailblazing forward player that's running in behind. I mean, ideally, I think that's what we would ultimately want. And I don't know, truthfully, a ton about Guirassy. I'm just looking strictly at what the paper says with numbers, and 28 goals and 2 assists. That's elite production. This deal seems kind of similar, at least as far as the age goes, to when we brought in Carlos Bacca. We brought Carlos Bacca in. We spent 25 to 30, which was a lot of money for Milan at that point. And Bacca was coming off a year where I'm going to read this to you, where he played 37 games. He scored 20 goals and he had 6 assists for Sevilla in the league. The year before he played for Sevilla, he had 21. And the year before that, he played for Club Brugge and had 28. So it strikes me as a move that maybe Milan in the short term are thinking, hey, this might not be our long-term solution. This might not be a guy that's going to be there for 5, 6, 7 years. But can this guy give us 3 to 4? And you get maybe his 29 to 32, 33 years, where
And you're also
along with
yeah.
the supporting cast around him, Martino, that some of the other strikers that have failed in the past did not have.
Yeah.
When you're lining up Rafa, Pulisic, Chukwueze, Okafor, and you're putting a Guirassy who had to, again, 28 goals, the supporting cast is there. So I think ultimately, look, people want the sexy name. Milan fans they've been begging for a striker. They've been begging for years for the guy, the it guy. We haven't been able to get it. We've gotten stopgap solutions, and Giroud's been the best one, and Ibrahimovic, right, that we've had in a decade, call it.
Correct.
If you get Guirassy and he starts scoring goals, no one will care about the age. No one will care about, well, what about Sesko? What about Xerxes? They want to see goals. And ultimately, people can say whatever they want. I've seen people use this as a criticism of Haaland. All he does is score tap-ins. All he does is score things in the box. If it's so simple, why aren't we seeing 20-plus goal scorers up and down these teams in these top 5 leagues? 20-goal scorer, 28 goals. 28 goals. If you give me 18, if he gives me a 10-goal reduction from what he scored this year, and he gives me 18 goals, that's still more than any of the strikers we had in how many years? Maybe Baca in the league?
Oh, yeah, correct. Baca.
That's even more. I think he had 16.
He had 18.
18. He could score 10 less goals than Baca's best year, and that's still a really good, solid production and an improvement on what we had this year. So that's kind of my opinion of it. I understand why people are saying they want this guy, they want that guy. I understand that because that's all the media has been selling us and shoving down our throats for the past 6 months. Xerxes, Esco. I want someone who can produce. And if this management and this coach believes this is the guy for that price, I'm for it. I'm for it. And the results, as I said with Fonseca, will tell everything on the pitch. I think more so it's the wages, because 5 is a lot net for a striker at 28. And there is that risk here where if it doesn't work out year 1, you might be stuck in a situation where you might have to kind of say, man, if this flops bad, we got to dump him quick, because 29, 30, now it's like it's tough to move someone who is at that age and already fell off after a year, right? Like, but Piontek, we got Piontek. He had that big immediate rise, and they said, this guy ain't it. They dumped him to Hertha Berlin and got 25 to 27 back after like a year and a half. So there is that concern that I do have, but I just want someone that can produce. That's all I want. That's all Milan fans should want at this point. He's not 38, guys.
No. He had 11 goals, 11 league goals in 1,600 minutes last year. He's got 44 goals in 58 matches for Stuttgart. And as you mentioned, playing for Stuttgart and scoring that many goals and not wanting that, but also seeing what Carlos Baca was doing in Belgium, but then moving. Like, it's just, to me, the only downside to it is the demand on the wages. I think that's far too much.
Yeah, I agree.
I would appreciate some incentives on his end, maybe like $3.5 million net. And then, hey, if you have over 20 goals, no problem, brother. Take your $5 million.
But Martino, in his defense and his agent's defense, this is you'd assume this is
the contract that you get paid the most.
So he's getting that one contract off the back of his production, and that's
fine. But then you can then go to the Premier League. Then, if you don't want AC Milan playing in the Champions League and all that, and I totally get your point. You're right, but fine. If you want money, then go where the money is. Because if you're asking for something more than what a club can obviously give you, or that makes sense,
I could
see
it doesn't make sense. I could see it being 4.5 plus bonuses.
I think it's still a risk. I think it's still a risk.
Production. That's what I could see it personally being, which wouldn't be bad.
Sorry. Eventually you have to pay up. Eventually you have to pay up. I just wouldn't do it with him then, because if it's a thing that you're taking a risk with wages, then just why aren't we being more aggressive with Xerxes or whatever, right? Like there's like different angles to it. We don't know the truth. As far as we know, that the thing that makes the most sense for Milan and that they have continued to push is Joshua Zirkzee. But another name that continuously pops up after every single season and a few months, Jonathan David. Listen, I will start off by saying this. I like Jonathan David. Okay. This is a good young player who has been very productive on a legitimate team for quite some time. But my goodness, you might think he's Harry Houdini with the disappearing acts that he puts on from months on end. And I appreciate the production, right? Because goals are goals. If they come in bunches, yeah, sure, you get it. But what Milan truthfully need is a guy who is consistent over the course of a full season. Jonathan David, and what he does is, and what everybody likes to get on for Rafael Leao about for this season, right? Where were you for a few months in the league with scoring? You weren't there. It's one thing when it's a winger who also does a ton of creating. It's another thing when it's a bona fide striker that you're supposed to be paying around 25 million euro for with 1 year left on your deal, and you disappear for a few months. And I've seen Jonathan miss sitters on sitters that are like, oh my goodness, how could you possibly miss that? That Giroud infamously does.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hate the Jonathan David signing, and I said this months ago that they would circle back around if certain signings would not work because he has 1 year left on the deal. It lines up in what management likes to do in terms of a younger profile, someone who is production in a top 5 league.
Contract running down. They did it with Chukwueze. Chukwueze had 1 year left on his contract too.
And Loftus-Cheek and Christian Pulisic.
Yep.
All these guys had all those years left. They're talented players, productive players that could be flawed to an extent, but these massive clubs don't go after them. I like that business. It's not about the business like that, right? For me, it's a little bit on the price. I think anything over 25 million is silly. I think that's nonsense from Lille to demand something as such, especially with their situation. But the club does have a good relationship with them, so we could see what happens there. And again, if Paulo Fonseca is your guy, Matt, and he believes in him, sure. But again, Serie A is a difficult league to adapt to. Jonathan David would not be a poor signing unless it's over 25 million, in my opinion. What is yours? Because I think anything in the 20 to 25 million range for David is okay with me, especially if you can't get a Zirkzee and the other top dogs. Jonathan David is potentially one of those signings that is coming across as last resort, but it's not a desperation sort of move. So, your thoughts?
So, the more I look at the targets or the tracks, if you will, of their striker search, the more I believe that they're going to go heavy after a expensive central defender.
So
the more I look at it,
Buongiorno. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
That's my feeling, because I feel like, look, they with Ibrahimovic, when they got Giroud on a 1 million fee from Chelsea, and they made it work for 3 years, and they have a good supporting cast in the attacking department for that striker from a service standpoint. I feel as though they're kind of of that belief that they're saying we can get a striker that can give us goals. We can find someone that's not going to cost us 50, 60 million. That's not the business we want to do, because the fact of the matter is this: despite having to part ways with a piece last summer to fund that market, and we expanded and we've ultimately added depth in our team, I still feel that they think that, look, just because we have a budget of 100 doesn't mean or 120 doesn't mean we want to go out there and just spend everything. I think that there's a responsibility and a fiscal responsibility that this ownership has, that they're saying, look, we're going to still look for opportunities. Just because we have the money to spend doesn't mean we're going to say 50 for Sesko or 60 for Sesko, 40 for this guy. I don't think they're still of that belief. I think it's ultimately opportunity. Guirassy is a prime example of an opportunity addition. They might be able to get a guy for 17, 20 million, and it could be like a stroke of genius by Milan management, where they get a guy that's like, hey, this guy gives us 18 to 20 goals, like for 17 million. He's not 37 years old. That's a pretty sound move. And they still need central defensive help. I mean, if you watch the Torino game and you've watched this team the entire season, there's everything you need. There's evidence everywhere. In every single game,
Milan's best defender for next year was playing in that game, and he wasn't on our
team.
team.
They need defensive help. They need defensive help. And Buongiorno, if you buy into the media frenzy and the quotes that he's ripe for the taking.
Dude, he's
you
right
can go
there.
to Torino.
Right there, dude.
I know Urbano Cairo he stiffed us in the years past with Belotti. That was a great deal that ultimately looks miserable for them. You look at it, I think they wanted him. They talked about him in January. They backed off. They're like, we can't do this right now. I think that things are falling into place where it could be Buongiorno is our marquee signing of the summer. And I don't think Milan fans would be too disappointed in that, because I think they look at how dire we have been defensively and how much we do need that defensive reinforcement, that you bring Buongiorno in, maybe Magnon is sold, you bring in another goalkeeper. Now you can kind of play around with him. Maybe you can buy a right back that is going to move the needle. You can get a little bit more of a luxury signing in the midfield, in a central defensive midfield player. Like, I think that's kind of still going to be Milan's approach. I know we've talked about, maybe they're going to spend more on less players, but explain that, because they bought a ton last year. Could it be that they still get 5 players in here and the average price of each of those players is 25, maybe 25 to 30? It could be. They have players leaving.
Of course. Because it really just depends on the player. I think Milan will get close to a number around 40 million for a singular player. I think Buongiorno is interesting. I don't think he goes to Juventus because the Juve are moving in a Calafiori. I don't think a Roma or a Lazio.
And they can't. Juventus probably can't spend that much.
No, they can't anyways. And for Inter now getting taken over by Oak Tree, I don't think you absolutely see a purchase of that number.
If I'm correct, Martino, he has interest abroad. Looks as though he wants to stay in Italy.
Listen, this is the sort of move where I usually give the benefit of the doubt and try and think logically. I'm not saying like people don't think logically if they get upset about how some moves go, but I see the vision or the angle for management that way. However, for this situation and this player, don't find it acceptable to let him go. He is so good at everything that they aren't and fits everything that they don't have. And the fact that he is willing to come and willing to, be interested and talks about who his idols were. Shocker, it's Maldini and Nesta. This right here, this is actually an Italian that's worth the money. Okay? 40 million, when, by the way, Davide Fratesi went for 40 million. This was a guy in the running for Defender of the Year. He didn't finish top 3, but whatever. Thuram didn't finish top 3 for strikers. It's stupid. But that's a guy, man. That's a legitimate, talented player that is well-rounded and does very well against the best strikers in the league. There's potential there, and he's at a great age. He's willing to stay in Italy.
Also, you buy domestic too. I think that there is something to be said. It doesn't listen before people come at me and say, "Why do we always have to buy Italian?" We should still have some semblance of an Italian DNA.
If the guy's worth it, this is one of those guys.
And Buongiorno is worth, and Buongiorno in my eyes is worth it.
No, I agree.
Absolutely. This could be a guy that starts and is a cornerstone player for the national team too.
Yeah. I think there was certain players like Calafiori, to me, worth it. Gianluca Scamacca, for that price, yes, he was worth it. But when you tell me Davide Fratesi for 40-something million, no, like I'm sorry. In that situation last year, Milan were not going to do that. Yeah. That didn't make sense. And this is something that we all know other YouTube channels that are Milan heavy were coming at me for and trying to like also, say I don't want Italians
for Milan, right?
My name is Martino Puccio. I don't not want Italians, but the move has to make sense, because you know what's the most important thing besides you guys wanting someone of a certain ethnicity? It's Milan being really fucking good.
Yeah.
And if they're not going to be really good because you want to pick a guy from a certain background, then you lost the plot to begin with. Because the best teams that this club has had players coming from all sorts of countries.
Yeah.
So the fact that we want to handcuff ourselves to a certain player, listen, get the guy that makes the most sense. And if he so happens to be Italian, then God bless. Otherwise, you can't operate like that. And they're going to be able to promote guys from within. Kevin Zeroli, Bartesaghi, guys like that. Those are Italians in there.
I still
But
also think too,
yeah,
just I know not to deviate too much from the main question, which was David, but
yes.
in a Buongiorno situation, look, if the formula that was being thrown around for Xerxes was Salamakers can drive down the price. We got Colombo, you got Pobega, who Pobega was on loan at Torino, right? He was played there.
Yes.
He has familiarity. I know they're undergoing some changes. Juric is not going to be the coach,
Okay.
but there is some sort of formula where I think if you went to Torino and you said, hey, we'll give you this sum of money, call 30, 35, 33, and we'll throw in Colombo to make the price down, or Pobega on loan. Don't you think that at least Torino are going to talk? And you think at least, I think Milan are going to go back in for
You'd hope.
I'm not saying they're going to get him automatically, but if you look up and down the potential clubs that could afford him, number one. Number two, that would be looking for a central defender in Italy this summer. Is there a better opportunity for Buongiorno than Milan? Inter are not getting a central defender. Juventus are not getting a central defender. Right. Milan have the opportunity. If they want Buongiorno and they earmark him as the guy, and they're really serious about reinforcing the back line, you can go in and get that defender from Torino, and you could put together a package that is a win-win for both Torino and for Milan.
Yes.
So
absolutely,
it's going to be an exciting summer, guys.
For me, the situation isn't dire. It's on one thing, and it's on how aggressive Milan are for a guy of this talent level. Are Milan going to do that? Are they finally going to say, all bets off, this is our guy, okay? And be aggressive about it. I think something like that signals to the fan base of more ambition, right? Because when you're kind of like shooting for guys like this and just like Xerxes, and you miss out because it's for whatever reason, like Xerxes could be wages, he wants too many and you can't compete with Premier League wages, right? Or the fact that Bologna wanted more than that release clause. Whoever knows whatever the situation is there, the clause is for 40 million for everybody. But I don't think Bayern buy him back and then try and flip. Check out the video, guys. We've done it so many times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know we had the Jonathan David graphic up here. I think David would arrive if Guirassy doesn't move off of his wage fee that he is demanding, or Xerxes doesn't arrive. I don't see a scenario in which it's Xerxes and David. I don't think they do two strikers. If that were to happen, I'd be floored. But rest assured, that is not probably going to happen to Milan.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
So we've been talking about strikers. It's an ongoing conversation. It's a discussion that's going to continue into the summer months. And we're talking about, the current depth chart, and we're talking about the options we have. And I think, again, I could be just looking at this completely incorrect. But with Francesco Camarda as being such a prolific prospect and talent for us, and one of the best and highly sought after Italian talents that I've seen, that you've seen in recent years, as far as hype, like the background, the scoring record,
I'm happy you brought this up. Yeah.
Do you think that that's their pivot in saying, hey, look, we're trying to go and have him committed to this club? There is, again, sources, no sources, legitimacy of them or not. There's a lot of interest abroad for Camarda, right?
Yeah, I think he's staying though. He's
no.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the thought process in this striker search is kind of somewhat tied to inking up Camarda? Because if you're going to sign Camarda to his first professional contract until 2027, 2028, and he'll be 20 years old around that point. I could be wrong on his age. He's very young.
He just turned 16. He'll be 19.
Just turned 16. So he'll be late teens at that point, right?
Yeah.
But let's assume he comes on very strong and he plays really well. Do you think that that has some sort of bearing in any of this?
To an extent.
Wanting to commit more to a 3-4 year guy versus getting the money out there for us. Because if you get there and you get Sesko, who is 21, or Xerxes, who's 22, and you're tying them up with a lot of money, and you're basically saying this is our guy for the next decade, where does that leave Camarda in the conversation if you're thinking more so big picture and down the road? Do you think that has any bearing at all in this whole conversation for the striker?
So great question. I've thought about this because I always think about like literally everything with this team. So I thought about it, right? And I think I've mentioned it maybe one time on one of the live streams. And it's kind of hard for the club to operate under the assumption that he's going to be somebody like that because still, truthfully, we don't know yet. He had a good Primavera season. Second half kind of waning a little bit, but that's kind of what happens with your legs. You're playing at a higher level of football. You're playing against kids who are significantly older than you. There's been incredible bright spots. We do know about the U23 team working and what's going to be happening there. He's likely to go and play there next year under Daniele Bonera. For me, I do think to an extent, yes, they do think that. Because if Camarda is supposed to be... Okay, so what he's supposed to be is, like, we know what the ceiling is. The ceiling is one of the best Italian strikers of the past 20 years, right? That's the hype going around right now. The talent level and some of the stuff that he does is your jaw drops. Physically, clearly not there yet. And of course, that timeline does sync up with Milan. And you don't want somebody blocking him for years if he's making that sort of progression. There's two things with it. One, it makes it easier for this management to flip such a player, as in the star striker of whoever they currently were to purchase. You look good there, then you just promote from within, which is something that they plan on doing. That's why they have the U23 team. For me, I think with Francesco Camarda, it's really about how they see him. And I'm not truly sure how they view him yet, but we got to look at the facts, right? One, they promoted him to the Primavera team. He was one of the youngest players. He did very well there, youth league, actual league. This guy's going to the U23 system. He's the youngest ever debutant for the club. You don't make it to Milan at 15 unless they view you as somebody who is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Gigi Donnarumma was a prime example, right?
Like just and Laponava, by the way, is also another guy that's highly regarded. For Camarda, there is no doubt that he's doing this renewal. It's supposed to happen anyways in June. Everybody kind of knew this. This has been signaled by Sempre Milan. For me, I do think you operate under that. You buy yourself some time because 3 years is plenty of time for him to go and develop, and we'll see what his growth is. And again, like, they're not going to be able to get this guy. And again, say they were to get Sesko, right? And this will be my final point before we move on to wrap this up. There is like a player where you look at Sesko, right, and he blossoms, he does phenomenal, say they were to get him. The way Milan ran, and if Redbird's still in the club, Sesko would have been sold for over 100 million, most likely. Whatever the clause would be, right? Same would go for maybe Xerxes. So if like Xerxes played phenomenal with Bologna, say he explodes even further with Milan, there's a good chance someone's going to poach him from the Premier League. With the way things are currently going and the structure of the team, it's certainly possible. With these moves, yeah. I mean, Jonathan David, 3-4 year gap. Like, and even then, say Camarda's ready for first team football for Milan at 19. They're not going to be playing him every single week, right? Like, this will probably be like a potential super sub, a guy that comes off the bench. And again, this is under the assumption that Camarda makes those strides. If Camarda keeps making these strides, like the guy might be starting for the club before the end of the decade. And that's very tough to do because we're talking about 3 years from now. He's 19.
Yeah.
19-year-old starting for Milan. By the way, guys, outside of the biggest of banter eras, guys who do that are really just Franco Baresi or Paolo Maldini, right? Calabria debuted 16, or even Gigio. We know what Gigio is. Gigio's still highly regarded as a goalkeeper. You have to be special. It's not like you're anybody. Ultimately, we'll see what happens there. I think the Camarda stuff matters. I think it does. I'm glad that you brought up that point because I've forgotten to have brought that up in a podcast. Let us know what you guys think about that. And again, like, subscribe, comment on the podcast before we go into our final note here. And this is a somber one. Simon Kjaer, he's on his way out. We kind of knew this would happen. There he is with his Viking beard and haircut after Milan won the Scudetto. For me, Simon Kjaer was one of the better players in the transition from Milan coming out of the Banter era to what they are now in a competitive Champions League team, a team that hopes to fight for trophies. Simon Kjaer is just a true consummate professional. He was a solid defender. He was a great leader. He did it by example or just the fire that he had underneath his belly. For me, after that injury, everything changed for him. And it's a really difficult thing to come back from at his age, his position, at this level of play, in the way Milan like to play as well, with a high pressing system. You need to be able to run. Kjaer was phenomenal prior to his injury. He was Milan's best defender, I would say, probably since Thiago Silva, probably at that point. That's how dire they were. That's how they didn't have anyone of that defensive level, especially at the center back position. Once Tomori came along, it was a little different, right? But Simon Kjaer, talk about stabilizing a defense, costing virtually nothing on similar deals to what we got Olivier Giroud for. This sort of move was one of the older guard when they were heavily investing in young players. Simon Kjaer completely changed the attitude of the back line. He helped players like Romagnoli grow, even Tomori to an extent. This guy was a leader. But unfortunately, every single time after his injury, you just saw that he was a shadow of himself.
He didn't
And it
have
was sad. It
the
was
speed. The
disappointing.
step was there. He was 2 steps
But
behind.
overall, Matt, this was one of the best signings Milan have had in the past 10 years. There's nothing negative to say about his time here at Milan. So yeah, Simon Kjaer, congratulations on a phenomenal career towards the back end. Someone who really was considered a failure in most places he went to. This is a redemption arc. This is one of the better stories that has happened within the club. This is one of the better characters that they've had in recent years. And I am sad to see him go because he provided so much. And I think everybody that went through that Banta era and saw everything that happened and saw the type of player that this guy was at the time in which they needed someone like that more than ever at the back line, Simon Kjaer far exceeded expectations out of a plethora of signings over the past 10 years or so. So Simon Kjaer, send off. Thank you. Sant'Angelo, your thoughts on his tenure?
Yeah, there was a little tribute there to Martina. Look, I think him and Ibrahimovic played very similar roles as the elder statesman of this new, youthful, vibrant group that was, in search of trophies, in search of being a regular in the Champions League, and playing big nights at the San Siro in midweek, right? I think when we got Simon Kjaer, I think people looked at it as like, oh, look at Milan. They're being cheap. They're not getting a legitimate defender. They're going for bargain options, players that are excess at other clubs. Yeah. And he came in and, look, there was, a lot of talk about, his relationship with Ibrahimovic, right? They had their clashing years back, right? But I think, you look at what Simon Kjaer provided when he joined the club was a presence of the veteran frame and backbone. Backbone is probably the one thing that I kind of gravitate towards, the one word, right, to describe him, because I think that, in a young team and a young defense, when you had Calabria, Teo, Tomori, Kalulu, Malik Chow, I mean, up and on and on and on, Simon Kjaer is that presence in defense. I understand that people could say, yeah, but Ibrahimovic played that role. But it's different when you're a defender. It's not easy playing defense at Milan. It's still a struggle. But there's a lot of weight to playing in that role for Milan due to their legendary past of, Maldini, Nesta, Baresi, like so many different names, right? It takes a lot of responsibility. And there's a lot of weight to wearing a shirt as a defender at Milan. So when you brought in Simon Kjaer, I don't think, again, same thing with, some of the other players and coaches we've mentioned, Pioli, Ibrahimovic, Giroud. I don't think in anyone's wildest dreams that we expect Kjaer to be like a stabilizer one of those leaders in the back that really, if you look at it, helped bridge the gap for Milan from a team that was, Europa League on the outside looking in to, hey, we need a steady defender that can give us a presence and guide and steer the ship in the back. And he offered that. And I think he was a great connecting piece from the previous defenders, the previous guys we had, to the Scudetto year, and being able to bridge it now toward, hey, you know what? I'm leaving. Simon Kjaer, I'm leaving. But now I have guys in here like Fikayo Tomori, who I see as a leader, who's been here for a handful of years now. And I think that those things, those intangible qualities that these squads have, when they get a veteran player. Look at Chelsea. Chelsea, prime example. They had Thiago Silva when he was on the back end of his career. He was there for a couple of years, but look how the fans embraced him. Look how passionate, emotional he was in his farewell this past weekend. The players, they respond. Look at all the positive messages we've seen.
Rafa. I know. I try not to look too much because it should have been us, but yeah.
Like those players truly, when they train with a player like Kjaer day to day at Milanello, they see he has preparation. They see how he carries himself. And this isn't even talking about his duties and his heroics with Denmark. Like this guy's a true leader, an emblematic player over the past handful of years at Milan. This newer revitalized Milan. So I do wish him the best in whatever he does next. I don't think he called retirement. Maybe he does call retirement. Who knows? But a great servant to the club. There's no ill will, nothing bad to say. It's obvious that he was breaking down. He just didn't have a step. He wasn't able to quite play consistently enough and stay available for the coach. But a true leader, a true professional, and a true great for the sport. So tip of the cap to Simon. We wish you all the best.
Yeah. Unfortunately, him and Giroud are on their way out. Again, two guys that have been massive parts.
Over the past 3 years, you lost Kjaer, Ibrahimovic, Giroud. I mean, you lost a lot of veteran. DNA.
It matters. It matters. That's why current guys have to step up in that roles. And so it's a big season heading up for quite a few of them, to be quite honest with you. Again, guys, we appreciate you so much. A little over an hour here. Again, like, subscribe, comment on the video. Try to get us to 100 likes. We get so many views. We really appreciate everybody that tries and supports us. That Milan Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and all your other audio platforms. At That Milan Pod on Twitter. Again, follow Matt at Matt_Santangelo. Follow me at Martino Puccio. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, obviously, and Twitter. And again, guys, we appreciate everything. We're going to have a lot more content coming up for the summer. We're going to do a season in review, try and get more guests. I have a couple that are interested and that we're trying to get on, but it's really difficult with my schedule. Just be prepped. Come summertime, I have to work during the Olympics, so I won't be around for 3 weeks or so. So unfortunately, content will probably be lacking a little bit around then, but that's just for future reference. And again, look out for my Champions League final preview writing piece for The Athletic. Matt, any other side work that you have coming up that the fans might be interested in?
With the season, with 1 week left, I should be putting out some last-minute Serie A fantasy content, so go check that out. You might see some more volume from me through multiple sites, Milan Reports, Football Italia. It really just depends on my schedule, just like Martino's. So anything that I am working on or cooking up, you'll find all that information on Twitter at Matt_Santangelo. And again, thank you guys for riding along with us for this season. I know we've been putting out content. We've been giving you guys previews, reviews, transfer stuff, coaching stuff. We really do appreciate the support. As Martino mentioned, the likes, the subscriptions to Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the comments consistently. We see it all, and we do truly appreciate what you guys have given us and helping us build this community on here. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much again. Take care.